I'm still going back. I've had notes that I have not forgotten over the last months of things I have mentioned. I'm going back and re-mention a few things. Maybe not exactly the way in which you ask it, but I took the basis of what I had said previously and your recollection thereof, and I put them all together. One is to point out to you that all of you forget about these kind of famous people that you imagine have lived in history. You have got to abandon any notion of any apparent famous figure in this and your past hardwired dreams about who that person may have been, what they may have been like, the kinds of stories of where they got their information. The gods talked to them, they went out wandering in the desert, they had visions. You got to forget all that. It's useless. None of the stories are true, by the way. It's not the way it works. None of them are. No matter who you heard about, no matter what story came out, whether they even attribute the story to the person, if indeed the person had some extraordinary understanding and was indeed at their time and place, right at the cutting edge, the unstable edge of this thing, I assure you, any story, I don't care what it was, about how they studied, who they found, spirits talked to them, they had a vision, none of it's true, I'm telling you. None of it. So any imagination you had about it, even if you think there is a historical basis for it, I'm telling you, is useless. You might as well be diddling with your own mind. You're getting nowhere with it. So forget those people. I'm talking to you now. All of you are subject, when you begin this, to a position of asymmetric embarkation. Everybody starts off limping. Everybody starts off crippled. Some of you may now have some knowledge of each other's background. You may even know more gossip about each other than I know. And so some of you may believe that somebody else sitting in here had a richer background than you did. Or you may have grown up feeling as though you were the nerd of high school. And you may now have found out, as far as you can tell, that some other person in this group not only played football, but played clarinet in the high school band in their spare time. And so you may think, well, somebody was not as one-sided as I am. But everyone started. Everybody is born that way on this planet. And to commence upon this strange journey is no exception. It is a position of asymmetric embarkation. Now you people continue not only to write to me and little notes, but there are things I know about you that if I started talking some night, no matter my disclaimers in the past, some of you would begin to swoon and just know for a fact that I do have ordinarily defined mystical abilities, because there are those of you sitting here right now that I can look at, and I know damn well that you are not out running. I know damn well that you're not getting exercise every day. There's some of you that I know full well are still suffering, when I told you it's forbidden, and that you can't do it. You can't stay involved with personal problems and do this. And I know it. I know what you're doing. I just haven't thrown you out. Everyone is asymmetrical, but you cannot stay there. And a part of what I'm going to mention, I think, before I get through, is the absolute necessity to loosen yourself from in a certain way from your genetic captivity. I've talked about it enough that it should be very simplistic, that all of you should at least have some mechanical imagination. You should have voices talking to yourself about it. But to those of you sitting here right now, and people will hear this tape either now or years from now and think that you're involved with this or something, there are those of you that will by and large lay in bed, almost do nothing to feed the red circuit. You will stuff yourself with just ordinary food that does not agree with you. You will suffer from headaches. You will suffer from near hallucinations. You will suffer from continuing anxiety and you continue to attribute it in some way to the environment. That is, the environment and its ultimate effect upon you-know-who. Little old me. That there is some kind of problem here. And to keep up my great history of making continual threats, the day is shortly coming. God, that sounds familiar. Of trimming off some fat, if you're not going to trim yourself. And there is absolutely no justification, there is no excuse. That is, it cannot be excused for any of you to continue to live in that asymmetrical manner, to continue to limp in your feelings, to continue to limp at the crudest level physically, to let the red circuit lay around, roll itself up into little wads of chicken fat, laziness, and it's tied right to what I've been trying to get you to see off and on for the last several weeks again, that the blue circuit can be seen as being a kind of nexus, an evolutionary nexus, and I have given you enough task, there should be enough to you by now to understand you can feel bad, and you're going to feel bad. Or withal, my continuing attempt through jokes and stories to point out to you, you can be feeling bad and apparently have the weight of the world upon your little blue circuit shoulders. You can be running through hardwired patterns of worrying about the nature of life, the starving people in the world, how maybe my theories are wrong. Maybe we are about to blow ourselves up, and boy, it's going to be horrible, and therefore you got to worry about it while you still got time. And if you would get out and run for 3 miles, it's gone, just like that. Only people who are absolutely captive will put up with that and play out their regular role. That I don't feel good. People look at me, people laugh at me. I'm not going to put on shorts and go out running. Somebody's going to point at me and say, look at there, it's thunder thighs. Or look at that guy, he's got an ass, his shorts are full of cream cheese, or who knows. Or people are going to drive by me in a truck and say, that guy runs just like, the Sugar Plum Fairy. Whatever it is that may be troubling you, monkey. When I talk like this, it's easy enough to think, well, in some way, or if you read this, or if, let's say I was saying this and you didn't know me, to think, all right, whoever that is talking, that person must have never felt that way, and it's easy enough, for a man with 2 legs to look at a cripple and say, you should be running every day. And that is no excuse. That's got nothing to do with it. To the same degree that you have gained anything from this, that same degree you should have taken occasion to see on your own whether the parts that you didn't like in some way were fallacious, which they're not. And so there is no excuse for doing one part of it, or trying to consider and trying to accept one part of it, and then to refute another part, that this is not important. I see the need, I guess, for being able to perhaps have a better psychological self-image of myself vis-a-vis the body. But after all, here I am in my 3rd decade, and it takes a lot of effort and time to get in shape, and I'm on the verge now of thinking great thoughts, and I almost have some kind of mystical experience when I go 2 or 3 days without sleep and eat 17 pizzas. And so, therefore, I don't have to do this. And I am going to trim fat some way. Whether you people are made aware of it through the public activities we do, or if I just have to tap you on the shoulder and tell you to leave once and for all. You cannot be asymmetrical. You cannot stay in the position in which you started. And there is, up until the point that all of you will recognize once you get there, if you do, but up until that point, there is no proper place to devote all of your energy. even the majority of your energy. It is not simply that since the new circuit, based upon my drawings, along with my caveats, but if the other circuit is going to likewise spring above the yellow circuit, then therefore I should be devoting my time to reading. I do not have time to run. I do not have time to turn any attention to all of these terrible daydreams and nightmares I have that seem to be concerned with my feelings toward myself and my feelings toward other people and my feelings toward other people's feelings toward me. It is not a matter that you have to be running 2 hours a day. It's not a matter that you are supposed to be doing something that might appear to have a direct effect upon one's emotional life 4 or 5 hours a day. And likewise with, but there has to be an accord to the asymmetrical position in which you embarked upon this. There has to be a continual feeding to the point that you are not that asymmetrical, that you are not limping in the way in which you are hardwired to limp. If you are, then what progress you seem to be making is coming shortly to an end. Once I jump this up to another level, I'm just assuring you, I know how it operates. You're going to get crushed. You won't be here. There's a whole lot of you. It's understandable. It's not just something new that you've suddenly started or failed to do of late. You all feel much better, as you might put it, about yourself. You all at times feel much better about life that since I have had the insight and audacity to point out to you the blatantly obvious that perhaps life is not in the terrible shape that the voices always told you, but all of that notwithstanding, you continue to limp, you're used to limping, but you feel as though I don't worry as much about the way in which I initially limped, my asymmetrical position. But there comes a time that it stops everything. If I talked real crudely, which I have been on the verge of many times, I could make this sound as though it was the most heartless thing in the world, because words will not properly detail it. But the kinds of things that I have turned into task, into rules and obligations, such as not suffering, they are all a quite correct reflection of how someone would be if they were not so asymmetrical. And much of that verbally would sound as though it were sans emotion is simply on a basis that cannot be put into binary words. That all of that which seems to be the very things that tie people to life, the concern about their family, their own children, once you understand that there is a difference between the so-called environment and the hard wiring, once you understand that, what seems to be the emotional line between you and everyone else is seen to be a specious connection. It's like life called the wrong number and you've been answering forever. It's as though you're in some way communicating back to these, you think they're actual voices, actual people, but it's communicating with someone, with life itself, with other people. The communication verges somewhere between specious and spurious. Take your somewhere in the middle there. Or on the other side of specious. It's one of those. If you had the correct understanding, I'll go ahead and jump into that binary quagmire once more. And I'm just going to tell you, but the words are totally insufficient. But I'm going to have to point it out to you again. If you had the correct understanding, if you were as enlightened, if you were as awake, if you were as spiritual, if you were as holy, any word that you like, as, and then fill in the blank, anyone you've ever imagined, a Moses, a Buddha, etc. I assure you, if you turned around and your own children or your own parents, let's say children, that seems to get most people, stepped into a kind of ditch, playing out their ordinary role. They were not involved with this, which is almost impossible to have two generations involved with this, by the way. And they stepped in there, you could simply turn your back and walk off, and that's the end of it for the present. That is how it is. And it's got nothing to do with having no feeling. It's got nothing to do with some theory. It's got nothing to do with trying to in some way suppress your emotions, because that is not true emotions. That is mechanical emotion. It is very strong since it's blood kin. But I'm telling you, if you turned around and your son or daughter did some horrible something, and they were no more than playing out their role on the grid, they were in no wise involved with this. I'm not going to talk it to death. I'm telling you, you could turn from your own child and walk off and forget about it. I'm talking about forget about it. The same way that you forget about yesterday it rained and I got wet, my brand new suit. All of life is arranged necessarily so that you believe otherwise, you and everyone else. That you certainly can't go out, I certainly can't go out, and talk like this. Because that verbally would almost sound as though it is the opposite side of doing anything worthwhile. That would sound like, well, this is a variation, or this is fascism, or something raised to heights unsuspected. And it's not. Only the ordinary will worry about that which can't be changed. I mean, can't be changed, not theoretically. Only the ordinary. And they're supposed to. Only the ordinary and you will. Let's get it from that dangerous area of someone else. It's the same thing with you. That everything that is wired up in you, all the way from, apparently, all of your limps, all of your warts, all of your personal problems, all the way from that to this continuing feeling that almost all of you suffer over from periodically, that is, ooh, I still am limping, and sometimes I don't suffer over it, and boy, that makes me feel terrible. That could be referred to as a kind of Betty Crocker suffering, except I'm not going to explain to you why. That I continue to do this, I continue to feel as though I'm no good, or I continue to lash out at people, and it's only maybe once, every 4 or 5 days I even think about it, and that makes me feel horrible, that I'll let this go on and I have not reached the point that I can stop it. It's not a matter of stopping it. It's a matter of finding out that what is fired in one's ordinarily conceived self is of no consequence. You were born limping in some way. You were born off-center, you and everyone else. If you can't see it by now, it's all been a waste of time. If you cannot periodically get quite clear glimpses that you're surrounded on this planet by everyone limping and everyone suffering over it, everyone believing I should be otherwise, everyone talking about change, everyone threatening to change, everyone plotting out theories, plans, how we could change, how if other people would change, I would change. If you cannot see that that is a kind of growth system, that is digestion, that is the transfer of energy inside the body of life, it's a glow of health. But you've wasted everything to believe that that's going to get me somewhere, that I'm going to go down one line of this. I'm going to track one line. I'm just sure I know what my main fault is. I'm going to follow this through. I'm going to work it out. You're just absolutely wasting your time. You'd be better off going to try and join one of these down-home powerhouse Superman Church of God in Christ Assembly Incorporated. If it's not too late, you'd be much better off to go in, let somebody slap you on the forehead and say, listen, brother or sister, all of us suck. Have faith and it'll be all right later. And if that will work, that's where you'll be much better off. Of course, I could classify that as a subjective suggestion to you. But since you've gone this far, it's fairly well true with all of you that you'd be better off And maybe perhaps we'd later find you on a street corner somewhere waving booklets and that same look in your eye. A part of what I started to say is you have got to see, for a few people, the absolute necessity, once you see it's possible, of loosening yourself as much as possible from genetic captivity. As I'm sure you're aware, I continue to go back and point out, as recently as last week, if I'm not mistaken, that given the choices that the human mind, at its best, has thus far come up with, that we, humanity, individually, are the products of either our environment or our heredity. That one of them is in charge, one way or the other. And I continue to point out that given those two possibilities, there is no environment. And I do not keep doing this to try and say you on some theory I've got. It's on the basis that once you see that you personally see it, for even a noonie-second, you will never be exactly the same. You will certainly fall back into the valley of the shadow of stupors and vapors. But once you see that, I know what I'm doing. And some of you can say amen without saying amen. Once you get a glimpse of that, it begins to unfold a lot, according to the kind of need you have, how fast it works. But once you get that clear, shot yourself that there is, based upon that we've got the environment, and then we've got ourselves, genetically speaking. The mind, throughout the ages, up until now, all the circuits, the best it could do, the yellow circuit operating at its best. Of course, as an aside, I'm aware of this. At its best, you might say, there are people who have tried to say, all right, it's not either or, but it's primarily this, and then you've got the other influence somewhat. In other words, they say such things as, all right, the environment, due to the way your father treated you, and your father was always picking you, when you were a young girl, that, boy, he wanted a son. He wanted a son to play football and to take the Little League, and it's just, what a disappointment. Ah, you're all right for a girl. Right, and then you kept trying to do tomboyish things. But, now, of course, that was all the environment. But you were born with certain genetic flaws. You were too short, one leg was thinner than the other, and even when you tried to get out and do kind of little tomboyish things to make your father happy, every time you'd try to play softball or to ride a scooter or ride a bike, you were constantly breaking your little limbs. So, now that you're a fucked up, grown up female person, their attitude would be, all right, after talking to you and hearing your story, there's no doubt, we can see where the primary trauma came from. It was this relationship of your father toward you and him wanting a male child. Of course, that's not to preclude heredity at all, because it was also aggravated by the fact that not only were you a female, which made him mad and then he traumatized you, but you were born sort of weakly, you had weak bones, and every time you would try and make him happy by doing something kind of semi-macho, you would hurt yourself, not even make him matter. So they would go so far as to point out, all right, they both may play a little part, but one of them is the predominant one, end of a side. It's not. Given those two choices, you've got to see for yourself that there is no environment. There is only heredity. Once you see that, it will begin to haunt you. And the part of kind of unfolding I was talking about is it will start coming back to you as a friendly spirit in the night, that there you are in the midst of doing what you and everyone else does constantly, verbally, non-verbally. You're laying all responsibility on the environment, primarily, of course, on not I, that is, other people. I was doing okay until she said. I was doing all right until he started acting like so-and-so. Or you were doing okay until a stranger, just in a split second, at the 7-Eleven store acted in a certain way. And that will begin to haunt you. That you will continually, let's say, when you make up figures, that even after you get a glimpse of it, that you'll go 1,000 times unnoticed on your own, by yourself, blaming the environment. I mean, there's no doubt. It's not in question. Out there made me do this, made me feel the way I feel right now, made me say what I say. And every 1,001th time, that one glimpse you got that could have been for a noonie-second, it comes back to you and it strikes you, even though you may not be able to relive it. With your entire being the first few times, but it'll come back to you, you idiot, there is no environment. You couldn't be wronger if you tried, and you know it's true because you saw it once. That all of that, the last 1,000 times, and you could have done it 1,000 times in the last 1,000 seconds. Or it could have been 1,000 days. But it comes back to you, I don't have to tell you, it comes back, and it's like it grabs your whole nervous system. Up as high as the yellow cert will go, and it begins to strangle you for a split second, that you're an idiot. You know that there is no such thing, and then simultaneously is the realization that I and everyone else goes continually on the basis that it is out there. And there you are stuck with a coin, and you got both sides turned simultaneously off of one coin, and it's right here, and you got that noonie second again to deal with it. That I know this is not true, and yet everything in me tells me it is, and everybody else in life, except me and maybe him, since he's the one that pointed out. As far as I know, only me at one split second and him knows that this is not true. And you're confronted with the largest adversary, theoretically, in the world. That is, everything in me makes me turn to the environment. Whatever goes on affects me, it's their fault. Every time I bring this up, I am tempted to talk and do certain nonverbal tricks to you people, to even sit here and try and make some of you get right to the edge of it where I could push you against it. Because verbally, it does not hold water to say that there is no environment. Not being a computer expert, I could push you a little further and say, based upon my general knowledge of what they refer to as hardware and software, is everybody is hardware. And yet it would appear to be just the opposite, given the two choices. But it is. That the environment would seem to be software. To here, I've got a program for you. But note, the ordinary intellect, the ordinary consciousness cannot confront the fact that a group of people, be it 2 people or 2,000, can be confronted with something that happens and seem to have been in the awareness of all of them, and it has a different effect upon all of them. It was the same software, the same environment, but it affected somebody this way and affected me this way. And you can immediately say, there is the proof of the power of the software. There is the power of the environment. And based upon those two possibilities, it is just the opposite. Remembering, of course, that even that's not true. But based upon those two, I'm telling you the most efficient way to begin to look at it, to try and remember it. There is no such thing as the environment. In its simplicity itself, except consciousness cannot deal with it, it takes another dimension. To say, all right, my father treated me this way, but why did he treat me this way? Why was my father the way he was? Once you start that line, just as soon as you start that, if you get the yellow circuit's attention to anybody, as soon as it gets any glimmering of what you're doing, you know, don't start that with me. You know, you're going to give me a headache, don't go down there. Why was your father that way? Consciousness cannot deal with that. Unless we go back and say, well, I happen to have known a bit about my grandfather. If half of what I heard was true about my grandfather, I guess there is, you might call it, some justification for the actions of my father. Whew. But don't try and say, well, wait a minute. What are you going to tell me? Did your grandfather just suddenly spring out from the bowels of hell and was just born a madman. Or maybe he was all right until he had your father, and your father got old enough to be dealt with, and just suddenly your grandfather just went raging mad and did everything he could. Maybe he became demon-possessed. How about that? Consciousness just goes, no. But you surely can see, we're back to a piece of the master stroke I've mentioned. That is such a useful tool, to say the least. Because for one thing, it turns the attention as much as possible on the present. You don't deal with in psychiatry, or just sitting around self-analysis, as it's called, just sitting around self-worrying, self-pity. You don't have to deal with, why did my father treat me that way? Fuck all that. I'm the one suffering over it. Who cares why he did, right? It is a piece of the master stroke. You know, psychiatry can't go into it. It's not a matter of why your father did this and what made him this way. You know, we ain't got time for that. You're the one paying $50 an hour. We're talking about you. You know, how can you deal with this? The environment dealt you this hand. Now we have got to, in some way, strengthen you, open your little eyes a little bit, give you a wider perspective, let you talk out all of these suppressed emotions and angers. And maybe, you know, if you live long enough and I don't go out of business, maybe you'll get to feeling better about it. There is no environment. And once you get a glimpse of that, every 1,001th time, it will suddenly strangle you. It will grab you and slap you in the face that I am going continually with no thought whatsoever, no recollection of being involved with this. It just seems to be another world, that everything going on out here is somebody's fault. It's the environment not operating in a proper manner. And there is no environment. It is all hardware. All programs won't fit. All software won't fit. It won't run in the same hardware. But where did the software come from, if there was such a thing? I don't think about it. Well, let's go back to your grandfather. Do we know anything about how his father treated him? Yeah, but those were hard times, coming over from a foreign country and lost everything he had. There is the environment, right? You will stay captive, absolutely captive, or in a state of genetic captivity, and you will be struggling against the wrong apparent influence. You will be struggling against the apparent environment. You'll be arguing, you'll be trying to theorize, you'll be trying to struggle against the apparent software. And there is no such thing. It is all a reflection of the hardware. It's all a reflection of genetic captivity. But once you get a glimpse of it, it's like getting a kind of corrective coating in regard to other people's captivity. Once you have enough of these glimpses that it is not the environment out here. It is not other people treat me some way. It's other people's genetic captivity. They can't change. Nothing's influenced them except being born. Nothing influenced me except being born. The kind of coding is understanding. It's not a trick. It is not just simply something mechanically. But to understand that is to understand, or have the kind of understanding, that when it comes down to the difference of doing that which is profitable for you, and of course then everybody else, then you can turn to your own blood kin. You can see what's going on. You can see that they are genetically captured. You're as much responsible, you're 50% responsible, if you want to look at it that way in the immediate now. You're 50% responsible, but you can't take it back. You can't unimpregnate somebody 30 years later, 15 years later. There it is, and there it is. It's like you dropped chewing gum and somebody stepped in it. But the kind of coding is understanding. Once you got a real notion of what you're doing involved with this, that which now sounds hard is just that which is profitable. Not just to you. It's not just a selfish act that, all right, my son or daughter is now involved with something that's just, I say, you know, unprofitable. You can fill in something. They're involved with insanity. They're now in a life of crime. They've now been voted, you know, Mr. Drug Dealer of the Southeast in 1985. And in a way that I'm not going to talk to death, they're simply not currently involved with you as to what they should do. And you, if you can see anything, you can always see where you can have some effect, that you might be able to get your finger in somebody's genetic captivity and move it enough and maybe grab their head and say, look, and for a split second they may look and go, ooh, that's about it. And that's rare. But assuming that you don't see that possibility, it's not a selfish act I'm talking about. It's not a trick when I say that you just turn and walk away from it like chewing gum you dropped on the street. It is a non-selfish act for life itself. Because if you go back and get involved with that, you are back at the level of your own initial genetic captivity. You are back in the masses, and life only has a few people doing this. Life invested something in you. If I must point out, I invested something in you bastards. But you have now turned around that life invested something in you, and you're back now doing that which is natural, that which would be laudable by the rest of the captives, that yes, a person, how wonderful it is, Miss So-and-so, after her son got arrested, he's been arrested now 14 times, she sold her house, she lost her job, she lost her health, she's had to sell all of her bonds, she squandered everything, but she has never, every time he's sent to a new prison, she'll pack up and move and get a job waiting on tables. And that's laudable at the ordinary level. That's the very kind of thing that holds life together. That's the very kind of thing, if life had occasion to notice its most mechanical parts, which it does not, I'm sorry to tell you. But if it did, it would look down, I assure you, I can speak this much for life, it would look down and say, my, okay. It would not cry, it would not hug this woman, she would only be doing the same kind of thing that the micromolecular little beings are doing in your own intestines and in your own stomach. There's nothing greatly to applaud, but they're doing exactly what they should be doing. But after life invests something in you and you understand it, you cannot turn back around and do that which is a waste of time. You cannot go back and do that which life already has over 99% of its population doing. It does not need you to go back and to cry over that which there's nothing to cry about, to go back and to fight the unbeatable foes and dream the impossible dreams. Not once you know better. To go back and cry over the environment when you know there is no environment. That is what I meant by a kind of corrective coding. It's not that you don't care, but it's based upon understanding. And likewise internally, I am not as handsome as I initially hoped I would be when I was 7 or 8 years old. I'm not as beautiful when I was a young girl, and Robert Redford did not seek me out. I am not as rich, whatever. I am not as apparently agreeable socially to large numbers of people as others are. Once you understand that nobody made you that way, that the environment had no effect on you, there is software for every possible program floating out there. How come the ones that seem to work on the friend that you envied all through high school, she or he was a fellow human being, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, all these possible software programs floating around, how is it that it seemed to take on him or her and didn't on you? And don't you turn around and say, well, it was my father, the way he treated me. You're an idiot. You're just ordinary. And you are going to be a captive of genetics, and you're going to die, and life's not ever going to notice it. But after you've made any effort at all, I should never say this, but what the hell? How about a theory? How about a speculation? What if there is a hell? But not for everybody, just a few people. Those that life invested something in, and then it goes back and steps in its own chewing gum and stays there. Think about that. That all those who do their routine task, and they die, they move on. But what if there are a few here and there? What if that is how life let the story get out throughout all these cultures, there being some kind of possible damnation, torture? I don't know, it just came to me, just speculation. That maybe it's where it spent its money, it spent its time, and showed you something, and then you went back and stepped in it and wouldn't move away from it. I don't know, I don't want to scare you, but I just thought I'd... After all, if we talk enough, perhaps we'll finally arrive at something. Can any of you also see something? That there is an optical duty to see thricely. If you are not, you're almost a co-conspirator in your own genetic captivity. All of that which you could say that you see, and I don't mean just through the two big old peepers, but that which I see in my mind, that which I see in my feelings, that there is an absolute for the few people, once you've got some notion of it, that it's like an optical duty to see thricely. And whatever you see, whatever seems to come to your attention enough that you become aware of it, that I think about this a lot. Every time I hear politics mentioned, or the right wing, every time I hear conservatives, I always immediately voices go blah, 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 blah. Or every time I hear something mentioned about Catholicism, every time I hear something mentioned about Muslims, I have these great immediate voices that cry out and make absolute statements. It's genes talking. That's the voices. And you can immediately perceive, here's what I see. And of course there's the other view, wrong as it may be. The duty is to see thricely. As long as someone is walking about and all you see is the two sides to every argument, you are a part of the many. Whatever life is invested in you, right now you are shortchanging it. I assume you know what this is connected. I brought up again since somebody asked me last week about a triaxial perception unit. But it seemed as though enough people did not perceive that I said much of anything last week. So hence I was going to throw you in at least one more line, that there is absolutely, if we consider this to be an army, if this was some kind of religion, there would be an optical duty for you to see thricely. Before we get to the eclectic part of the evening, I will skim rocks off of 2 or 3 different areas that have come up through notes to me and letters to me from out of town, and some things I just see going on with you people continually. And some of this is deserving of much greater depth on your own, and perhaps I will say something at some other time. But here is something common that people think they perceive going on. Some of you have had distinct questions hereon. That there seems to be out in life mechanically creative people of all sorts, philosophers, thinkers, quipsters, painters, writers, even pop songwriters, that seem to have in some way been touched by some kind of creative flow, perhaps even the primal flow in some form, and they have written something that you listen to the words of the song, or you read it, be it contemporaneous or be it 2,000 or 3,000 years old, And it just seems without any doubt that this had to be an extraordinary person to have written this, to have thought this and then put it in a form and wrote it down, sang it out, that this is not your run-of-the-mill, hello mama, boy I sure love you, would you lay down? Or you broke my heart and I broke your jaw. This is something of an unordinary nature. And once or twice I mentioned this, and some of you that think you're creative have yet to see what I'm pointing at. But that is, we now have enough media communication that all of you should be aware of this to some degree, without any particular understanding, without you being able to understand that which occurred 3,000 years ago, that you can read something that just strikes you as being this side of astounding, or perhaps a song. That, I mean, the song is intricate, complex, and seems to touch upon matters that almost verge upon some kind of mystical insight. And there the person is on television being interviewed, and they are as dumb as you are. It's not an act. They're almost illiterate. They're just as dumb, just as run-of-the-mill, as non-insightful as they could be. And yet they wrote this. For the handful of you that I see that keep squirming with this is not an attack upon creative people. But mechanically in life, life is always operating to grow, to expand itself. That there is that which seems to be, by almost any account, to be creative. This song, this poem, this short story is some kind of positive statement about humanity, about life. It helped me. I think highly of this. But the individual person is still being run as opposed to, let me shorthand it right now, that what seemed to be some kind of creative urge came out in this person that took minutes, months, that produced this work that impressed you, that seems to be, by almost any viewpoint, at the ordinary level, to be creative and positive. Let us just say that that was almost the primal flow touching someone. But then what they are personally, as opposed to, if I'm going to say that they were touched directly, somewhat by the primal flow, is now they're back operating at the personal flow. It is their old genetic hardwired self, and there's something there to learn that I keep hesitating to push any further. I keep waiting for some of you to get into. How is it that an ordinary, run-of-the-mill, dumbhead, peckerwood, redneck, hard-headed, dunderhead wrote this? How can this be? It is a very good question. But some of you should note that some of you are already wired up not to even like the question. That some of you are wired up that you don't want to see a hero. You don't want to play, even temporarily, a valet to your hero. I don't want to hear this guy interviewed. That song meant too much. I know what's going to happen. They're going to ask him what's going on and how he came up with this, and he's going to go, There is something there that you can learn something from. You don't have to be creative. You don't have to be wired up with any apparent talent of yourself. There's a whole accordion full of little snakes and tricks in this. That's why I keep bringing it out. Is it should strike you, non-verbal at least, as very, very curious. And then, of course, some of you should strike you even more curious that there are people that you can't see interviewed now that's been dead several thousand years, and you have these great dreams of, ooh, hey, listen, Buddha had to be what was happening. Anybody could have talked like that. Jesus, can you imagine if he was around him, he'd talk like that all the time. Or Bach. Anybody could write the kind of thing that touches me this way. God, I bet just to be around him would be like a small little sun in a small little universe, and everybody just bathed in the glow of it. Or anyone who could write what Shakespeare wrote. And it seems to detail various kinds of human personalities, the interactions of complex peoples. God, can you imagine the insight he had? Are you sure? Are you sure that you would have wanted to see the man with this kind of insight? Or a Freud, a Jung, to see them down to market and order 2 pounds of chopped liver and holler, "You got a liver again? God damn it," and they kick the thing. No. Or worse yet, some of these horrible stories that come out about people like Freud, and I'm not just picking on him, but these people that comes out, Havelock Ellis, I guess considered horizontally in the Western world the father of modern psychological sexuality. Now I keep hearing rumors about books or notes from his wife, you know, that he later like one time, and then as far as anybody knows, he never had any more sex life. And for several decades, he was the leading authority on the nature of human sexuality. There's something to be learned. It's not an attack. It's not laughing at those people. It is life operating in a certain way, and you stay distracted. Everybody's supposed to. You take everything personally. You take the people personally. There's only one person I know of that's of any pertinence to you that's alive that's worthwhile being taken personally. And I'm not even going to tell you who it is. Because you'd probably, well. How much time are we on the tape?
70 minutes.
Something else. Once you understand anything, you've got no business fooling around with D employees. This keeps coming out in various ways, and I've tried to respond to it. It has nothing to do with me personally trying to affect at all, any way specifically, your relationships with other people outside of this. But you might as well face up to it. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm not enforcing this, making this a rule. But you got no business fooling around with employees of D. I don't care who they are. I don't care if it's your mother and father. I don't care if it's your son or daughter. I don't care if it's who used to be your best friends. It's got nothing to do with condemning them. It's got nothing to do with laughing at them, because they have got to be there. This corporation would collapse. It's not a justification for them. They've got to be there. Because from views that I've still yet to try to go into, you people, that which apparently, just by all accounts, by all views that you can see as D, you can be wrong as hell. Even if you're right as hell, D is always there. If change is taking place, the only place that D is not there is when no C is there. The only place that you find an ordinary human with no faults is what? When there is no D, when there is no C, when all is E. That is, he's bird food. But you have got no business fooling around with employees of D. And you're surrounded by them in life. They're everywhere. You got to deal with them. But you got no business fooling around with them. For those of you in other places, that's a southern term, I guess. But I think people in Jersey understand that. You got no business fooling with them. You got no business fooling with them seriously. You got no business listening to them. You got absolutely no business talking to them seriously. Many of you find that, if you begin to see it, you would find that as this continual, worldwide acceptance that the environment is my problem. It's always these particular people. I keep getting attracted to the same kind of man, the same kind of woman. I keep getting jobs in different places. One time I'm working on the 8th floor in an advertising agency. 2 years later, I'm working in an assembly line packing boxes down in the basement. Within 2 or 3 days, I realized, I don't know why. I don't know what kind of evil genies have it in for me. They got different names, but I'm surrounded by these same kind of dumb, arrogant motherfuckers down here that I was up there. I can't get away from them. Everybody is wired up to fool around with indiscriminate acquaintances. But once you see what it is, you have got no business under any guise, whether it's to make money, whether you think it's to further your career, whether it's to get laid, whether it's to get unlaid, of fooling around with employees of D. Another little something else. What a proper use, until you can absolutely do it, but a proper use of a postscript. That is, when you find that you have let something unprofitable not only get primed up here, but get molecularly fired, that is, the kind of unprofitable thought, the unprofitable internal curse at somebody, it goes ahead and it fires. In other words, you apparently have thought it. Once you understand that I do feel quite clearly, and I can see that pictures come up, words come up, and they prime themselves, and I can stop it from actually firing. It was there, but to understand that there is a difference between this old hardwired, this hardware self-me, and this whatever this new thing is, that can see that. That was not me that was cursing those people. And in fact, I can stop it, and its effect is gone. I just don't let it fire. But until you can absolutely do that, just continually, once it does fire, there is temporarily a proper use. I hate to do it, but since there's a holiday coming up, to use a temporary postscript, and that is to be aware I didn't have to do that. Not suffer over it, not go into Betty Crocker suffering on 2 layers. But I simply did not have to do that, period, in the postscript.